All right, welcome everybody to the event today. Thanks so much for coming. Um, we are here today to talk about the film Dark Waters. So this is the Dark Waters film discussion with panel, and we have a couple amazing guests I'm going to introduce in just a moment as people are coming in. So please say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Uh, you know, did you watch Dark Waters over the weekend? Maybe this last weekend or the weekend before? We actually had over 800 people register to watch Dark Waters, which was amazing. We had to purchase an expanded license, do an encore screening, got dozens and dozens of emails from people sharing what they thought about the film. So it was really cool to have that much of a response, especially after the report came out. And so, I'm sure that you all share this in that it's exciting to have a lot of people paying attention to an issue. It's also a really heartbreaking and intense issue. And I'm sure there's a whole range of emotions that come with that. So I just want to acknowledge that as we open up this event, that we're coming to this with a lot of different experiences. So I just want to welcome you. Marin says in the chat, hi from Pittsburgh. Why is DuPont still in business? That was one of the number one comments that came through for email as well from people who watched the film, just being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. And, things like that. So anyway, hello, Afreed, Julie, Stephanie, everyone who's saying hi in the chat. It's good to see you. Pittsburgh, Louisville, Kentucky, Toronto, Canada, Ashtabula, Ohio. So welcome. All right, so my name is Ryan. I'm with Halt the Harm Network, and I'll be hosting this event, and grateful that you all are here. And I'm gonna start by introducing our guests, Dusty and Sil. So we've got with us Dusty Horwit, who is the author of the report, Fracking with Forever Chemicals, from Physicians for Social Responsibility. And so, hey, Dusty, how's it going? Just want to make sure everybody can hear us.
It's going well. Thanks, Ryan.
All right, cool. Thanks for joining. And we've also got Sil, who's a recently retired battalion chief and hazardous materials expert with the Youngstown, Ohio Fire Department. Hey, Sil, how's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me here, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm really glad you made it. So Dusty is the author and researcher who worked with Physicians for Social Responsibility to research chemical use in the oil and gas industry. And last Monday released the report, Fracking with Forever Chemicals. So we're gonna start off by just asking Dusty to give us a brief overview of what's in that report and where to find out more information. And I'll drop a link in the chat as well. And then we are gonna kind of talk a little bit with Sil about the implications of PFAS and just based on his experience. And then we're gonna go into more general conversation about the film and what we can do. So Dusty, I'm gonna turn this over to you and we'll get started.
All right. Thanks so much, Ryan. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So as Ryan mentioned, I'm a consultant with Physicians for Social Responsibility, and I wrote the report that PSR released last week, and that was featured in the New York Times and now other news outlets about the use of PFAS or likely use of PFAS in oil and gas operations. A little bit about myself. I'm an attorney, former reporter, former staff member on Capitol Hill. For about the past 15 years, I've investigated the use of various chemicals in oil and gas drilling and fracking for nonprofit environmental groups. Among other things, I've written a book chapter on hydraulic fracturing chemical disclosure for a textbook published by Elsevier, and I've testified in front of a number of government panels on oil and gas drilling and chemical-related impacts. One of the interesting things about this report and unsettling things about this report is that watching the movie Dark Waters actually inspired the investigation that I'm about to talk about. And I'll share a little bit more about that later. But to give an overview of our report, we found evidence suggesting that per and polyfluoroalkyl substances known as PFAS had been used in more than 1,200 oil and gas wells for fracking in 6 different states. And that is PFAS or substances that could break down into PFAS. Those states are Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Texas, and Wyoming. These chemicals may have been used even more widely, but we can't know for sure because of gaps in the reporting of chemical use in hydraulic fracturing and drilling operations. They may have been used in other states. They may also have been used in different stages of oil and gas operations, not just in fracking, but also in drilling. And they could have been used in other techniques for extracting oil and gas, like water flooding or acid fracturing. PFAS, for those who don't know, and those who've watched the movie do know quite a bit, unfortunately, about these chemicals. But for those who don't know, PFAS have been used widely in our economy for decades. They've been used most famously in Teflon and Teflon-coated pans and cookware. They've been used in, you'll hear Sil talk about firefighting applications. They've been used for waterproofing, clothing, stain-resistant fabrics, carpeting. And what we didn't know for years, but what chemical companies did know, as the movie Dark Waters revealed, is that these chemicals are very toxic. They're persistent in the environment. They basically don't break down in the environment, and they bioaccumulate inside people. And so those are some of our concerns about the use of these chemicals in oil and gas operations, combined with the fact that we know that in oil and gas operations, there are multiple pathways through which people could be exposed to toxic chemicals, including leaks, spills, dumping of wastewater, use of wastewater when it is spread intentionally on roads for dust suppression and ice and snow removal. So we are concerned that people could come into contact with these chemicals through oil and gas drilling. And we're concerned that that could happen unknowingly because this report revealed the use or potential use of these chemicals in oil and gas drilling publicly for the first time. We did not know, most people did not know that these chemicals or chemicals that could break down into PFAS had been used or may have been used in oil and gas operations. But there's a lot of evidence that they have been, and there's evidence that this use may go back decades in the oil and gas industry. So we're concerned that that exposure could be happening. It could be unknowing, like the exposure that was revealed or featured in the movie Dark Waters, and that people could be getting sick, whether the illness is caused because the PFAS they're exposed to in oil and gas operations adds to the other sources of PFAS that we're already being exposed to. All of us have, according to studies, have PFAS in our blood. Another concern is that PFAS could add to the other chemicals that people could be exposed to in oil and gas operations, including things like carcinogenic benzene, and particularly in the Marcellus Shale, radioactive elements, especially radium, that come up from deep underground in the oil and gas wastewater. So all these chemicals could combine into a toxic stew that people could be exposed to. So as I mentioned, this investigation began in part because of dark waters. Years ago, I was involved in submitting a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request to EPA, asking EPA for their health reviews and regulatory determinations for new chemicals proposed for use in drilling and hydraulic fracturing. And over several years, EPA gave us thousands of pages of documents in response to this request, showing how they had reviewed and regulated these new chemicals. And what we found, and we have written about this in reports over the years, is that EPA routinely found serious health concerns about these chemicals, but nonetheless approved them for commercial use in oil and gas wells. And these documents often had confidentiality claims that made it difficult to know where these chemicals were being used. So with this pile of documents, much like that scene in the movie where Mark Ruffalo, playing the attorney Rob Bilott, is in the room surrounded by documents, I saw the movie Dark Waters, and it jogged my memory, and I realized that I had seen a document in this pile of thousands of pages with the word PFOA in it, which, as you recall, is the key PFAS chemical that is at the center of the movie Dark Waters. So I went back into the records, and we found that one of these records that EPA had disclosed showed that in 2011, EPA had reviewed and then approved for commercial use 3 chemicals proposed for use in oil and gas drilling and or fracking that EPA's own regulators thought could break down into a substance similar to PFOA that could be toxic, persistent, and bioaccumulative in the environment. And they also had additional health concerns about these chemicals, that they could have blood toxicity, liver toxicity, that they could cause tumors. And yet nonetheless, they approved these chemicals for commercial use. One of the 3 chemicals actually did go into commercial use, and EPA documents, the latest available, show that the chemical was used at least as late as the year 2018. So the documents, like many of these other EPA documents, were covered with confidentiality claims that prevented us from knowing a lot of information about these 3 chemicals. However, one of the pieces of information that was available was the generic name of these chemicals: fluorinated acrylic alkylamino copolymer. So we took that generic name and we looked for it in the Frac Focus database, which is a nationwide database of well-by-well fracking chemical disclosure, showing what type of fracking chemicals companies had used in each well, each of thousands of wells in more than 20 different states. It's not a perfect database. There are significant gaps in the database that I have exposed in the past and other people have exposed, but it does give some sense of what chemicals companies are using. We did not find this particular chemical that EPA had approved as being used in the Frac Focus database. However, we did find 6 chemicals with related names that had been used in more than 1,200 wells in 6 different states. And those chemicals included, the most common one was called non-ionic fluorosurfactants. And we then took that information, we shared it with scientific experts who were familiar with PFAS, and they identified these chemicals as PFAS, likely PFAS, or chemicals that could break down into PFAS the way that the EPA scientists felt that the chemicals they reviewed could do. Some of the chemicals were listed on EPA's master list of PFAS chemicals. And we also found 2 scientific articles showing, stating that PFAS had been used in oil and gas operations for decades. And so that led us to our conclusion that there's a lot of evidence showing that PFAS chemicals or substances that can break down into them have been used widely in more than 1,200 wells in 6 different states. And these chemicals have been used by prominent oil and gas companies that operate not just in those 6 states, but some of them operate in other states too. Some of those companies include XTO Energy, which is a subsidiary of ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Anadarko, which was a co-owner along with BP of the ill-fated Macondo well that spewed millions of gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. And so at the end of the report, we have a number of recommendations, including that EPA and states conduct testing for these chemicals in the environment and identify where they've been used, that they conduct a health assessment to see through which pathways people could be exposed. And we call for a moratorium on the use of these chemicals in oil and gas drilling, and prohibitions on drilling and fracking in areas that are unimpacted, and limitations on drilling in areas that have been already impacted. So with that, let me turn it back to Ryan, and maybe we can hear a little bit from Sil about his experience as a firefighter with these chemicals.
Great. Thank you so much, Dusty. Really appreciate it. And everybody, check out the link in the chat. That'll bring you to the PSR's website, where you can find the report and a webinar that goes into more detail on all of this. All right. So, Sil, thanks so much for joining us. Right before we got on, you were saying that you actually rewatched the movie last night. So it'd be great to hear your reflection on the film Dark Waters, how it's relevant, and also to share, how did you first learn about these chemicals and the risks and your own experience with them?
Again, thank you for having me here. My name is Silverio Caggiano. I've been a battalion chief for the Youngstown Fire Department, where I have been a firefighter there for 39 years. I've been a hazardous materials specialist for the past 29 years. I sit on the State of Ohio Technical Advisory Committee for hazardous materials and weapons of mass destruction. I still sit on that. And I've been dealing with the fracking industry probably since 2014. The PFAS and the PFOA stuff has hit me in 3 different directions. One of the biggest things that the firefighters worry about is cancer. We've got our own separate division of our International Association of Firefighters Union that specifically identifies cancers that we get. Back in the day when firefighters used to fight fires, they went in with really nothing but like a neoprene coat or a rubberized weather coat, bunker boots, which went up to their hips, and the hose, and they never had masks. These fires they were fighting were basic construction. Most of the stuff that was in the house was wood, natural products, wool or cotton, but they still had lung issues. They still ended up with breathing problems. So we introduced the SCBA. The SCBA helped resolve a lot of that. But post-World War II, during World War II, these chemical companies were experimenting with just about anything that would fit in a test tube and they could put together. Some of it was good for the war product, some wasn't. Some of the stuff they shelved. Better living through chemistry became a buzzword, and the stuff that started going into our homes started to be coated with your PFOAs. Scotchguard, fireproofing, which contained PFOA. So our fires started to become more mini hazmat spills than they became actual fires. So what we ended up doing was changing what our exterior, or what we call the protective envelope that we wear. So we started getting into multi-layered protected environment. We can get into a fire further, fight a hotter fire, because these chemicals that they're using, the synthetic carpets that are giving off formaldehydes, the plastics that are giving off cyanide, hydrogen cyanide, all these chemicals were getting through the gear, were adhering to our clothing and were getting onto our skin. So they developed these turnout gears that were supposed to keep that off of us. Unfortunately, we found out the very thing that we were afraid of, the cancer-causing chemicals, was actually in our turnout gear as well. So that's kind of like the one way that we get hit with it. Not only are we getting hit with it, that it's in the fire byproducts, but it's actually on our turnout gear. The other way I got hit with it was when I started into jumping down the rabbit hole with fracking. I started going down that road because unlike Dow Chemical and DuPont that actually had to give the attorney the information so that he could do the research, and they had to tell him and show him under discovery what chemicals there were, the fracking industry doesn't abide by those rules. They're given a free pass. Anything they do at a wellhead site, anything that comes from the wellhead site carries trade secrecies. Under the Bush administration, G.W. Bush administration, they were exempted from a lot of Clean Water Drinking Act stuff. So in reality, if this company wasn't just making Teflon, if they were making something that was used in the fracking industry, odds are they could have dumped that stuff and never really had to tell people what was in it because they've given them that free pass. So when Dusty hit me with there's PFOA in there, it kind of kicked back to some of the discussion I had with the Pennsylvania Attorney General's environmental crimes people, where they were talking about unnamed surfactants. And what you got to realize is when you start looking at some of these material safety data sheets, or SDSs as we call them, when it comes to a fracking industry, you will see some stuff and then you'll see nothing. You'll see a couple of chemicals and then you'll see 60% trade secreted product. You don't know what those chemicals are. And as Dusty has now revealed, a lot of that stuff is starting to show up becoming PFAS related. So yeah, probably the surfactants that we were discussing in the Pennsylvania AG office probably was PFOA, but it's just not shown. It's not written there because they have no regulations to it. I've testified in front of the Ohio State Senate, the Ohio State Legislature, the Ohio House of Representatives. And like I told one guy who actually voted for the bill allowing the fracking industry their pass, if I ask your janitor for a material safety data sheet on the detergent he uses on your floor, he's going to give it to me. But if I go to a wellhead that's spewing stuff all over the ground, leaking chemicals into the environment, into the water, into the drinking water, the guy's just going to look at me and say, I don't got to give that to you. It's a trade secreted problem or product. It's gotten slightly better, but it's not all that much better. And you still run into instances where these chemicals are hidden. And as Dusty found out, PFOA is one of the ones that they've been hiding for good reason. It's a very dangerous chemical. And what you get into is you're getting down into the Marcellus Shale. You're bringing up radium, 226, 228. You're bringing these PFOAs up. And not only are you dealing with something that bioaccumulates as a chemical, but you're dealing with radium that bioaccumulates as an element. For some reason, the body sees radium like it sees calcium. As soon as you get a radium, and you have to ingest this stuff, but if you've ever watched how they handle this stuff, and we'll get into something later, these people aren't wearing proper PPE to handle it. So they're eating their sandwiches and they don't have gloves on. So people are ingesting this stuff. The workers are ingesting this stuff. And the body looks at this radium and says, oh, this is calcium. And it takes it right to your bones. If you want to watch a good movie on what radium can do to you, watch the Radium Dial Girls. It's about the women used to paint the radium on the watch dials to make them glow. But now you've got the PFOAs, you've got the radium, and now what they want to do is take this radiated brine water that comes up out of these fracking industries, and they want to spread it on our water, on our roads as a de-icer. So you've got the radium, you've got the PFOA or PFOS, and they want to put this on the road, which aerosolizes it, which allows you to ingest it. So from a hazmat viewpoint, it's a nightmare. From a firefighter viewpoint, I'm surrounded by it. It's in the firefighting foams. It is a hazmat technician and a firefighter I'm going to use to put out, burning hydrocarbons or coat volatile organic chemicals so they don't off vapor. It's hit us from so many different ends, and you can see where the industry has their push, because if you look at NFPA, if you look at the U.S. Fire Administration, if you look at anything coming out of the EPA, they're not saying don't ever use it anymore. They're just saying don't buy no more of this stuff. Get rid of what you got. They're not saying don't use it no more. Don't have it in your fire gear. They're just saying, you might not want to use this stuff no more. You might want to phase this out. If you do use it where you can contain this stuff so it can be cleaned up, which is ridiculous. And even when I look back into what was going on with our fire gear, I found my own fire union is in bed with the turnout gear people. They donate to the International Association of Firefighters, which is one of the big reasons why the International is not who is, and usually they're 110% pro-cancer, this is cancerous, that is cancerous. They're kind of really quiet about the PFAS stuff that's in our turnout gear, because these people that create our turnout gear are, paying into them. So just like in the movie where everybody's kind of got a piece of the pie and you're being shut out because billions of dollars are being spent, it's the same thing with this in the fracking industry and even with us in the firefighting industry. One of the biggest things that made me think in the movie was where the guy was talking about a fine that they were going to give the chemical company for poisoning the water. And he said, that's like about a day's profit from your Teflon line. And that's what it's all about. These guys are willing to pay these fines because to them, it's really nothing. They keep going on with their business. The fracking industry keeps going on with their business. They get caught. Okay, well, one Statoil poisoned 70,000 fish in a stream. Their fine wasn't even $1 a fish. And that didn't even account for any of the further damage that was going to happen to the people, because this stuff, again, comes up the food chain, the birth defects, the people that, were contaminated with it, breathed it in, the animals. Not even 70,000 fish, not even $1 a fish was their fine for contaminating that entire area. So, Dark Waters isn't a one-off. It's how industry does business.
Yeah. That's good, goes after.
All right. Thank you, Sil. And actually, one of the responses that came in actually just now via email from somebody who's here is just that it's both, empowering to see justice, but also really disheartening at how much work goes into trying to bring about justice. And she also said most communities don't have the amount of resources that it would take to do that.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Absolutely. So I was just about to open it up to questions. So, and to do that, I would like to ask everyone to use the hand raising feature. And if you're not familiar with how that works, then just say in the chat, just write in your question in the chat, and I'm happy to call on you and read it out. But Judith, do you want to jump in here?
Oh, please. Yes. You see what I have here? Scotchgard. I had no idea that this was as bad as it is. So that's what I'm asking about. And I was reading the label while he was speaking. I didn't see any of the letters or ideas listed. And C11-15 alkyl cycle, something or other, petroleum gases. So is that safe at all to use?
Either of you want to take that?
I can start. Sil, you might want to jump in. I don't know what 3M is the company that made Scotchgard. I think they still do. I'm not sure if they've changed the formula, but the PFAS, which was called PFOS, which what was in Scotchgard was also associated with serious health problems. And EPA said its use has largely been discontinued in the United States. What I would be concerned if that is true with this current bottle of Scotchgard that you have, my concern is that they may have switched to something else that could also be toxic. And so I would be wary about using. So I would personally, I would not use something like that, but you might want to look into what exactly is in it. And if you do find out, you can contact me. I'd be happy to put you in touch with some scientists who could give you further advice.
Okay, somebody said it's not new. This is brand new. I just bought this a couple of weeks ago. So thank you very much.
And Marty just put a link in the chat for Environmental Working Group. They work on verified products. So thanks, Marty, for dropping that in the chat.
Which you've got to look at, and to give you an analogy, one of the things that you run into, let's say with fentanyl, is as soon as they make fentanyl, the chemical formula for fentanyl, or one type of fentanyl, illegal, what they do is they make what's called analogs, which is they just switch the chemical formula around. So when you trade secret, let's say Scotchgard, you've got this chemical formula which is C plus a fluorocarbon. So what they do is they switch it around. They'll put the fluorocarbon in the middle. They'll add a few carbon atoms. They'll subtract a few. It's basically the same chemical, as Dusty would say, but it's called an analog. And you've got a brand new product. You don't know what the toxic effects of it can be, but it's also not considered by the EPA harmful, because it's not that C8 molecule that you're looking at. It's maybe a C11 or a C6 or a different analog of that chemical. So you don't really know for sure what these chemical companies are doing. Remember, these guys got the PhDs. They're playing with their chemistry sets. We don't have the PhDs. So we've got to guess what they're doing. So I would be very wary of that stuff. And I mean, this stuff was everywhere. Up until 2018, it was inside of your popcorn bags, so that your popcorn wouldn't, the grease from the popcorn wouldn't seep through the bag when you threw it in the microwave. So it was everywhere. And you start looking at where this stuff was, it was like, my God. And, and it makes me laugh, because here I am putting on gear to help me not be contaminated by this stuff. And the first 2 layers of the 3 shells on my turnout gear are loaded with it. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm probably going to have, hopefully God help me, I'm not going to have cancer, but everyone laughs to say, when you become a firefighter, you take 10 years off your life. I can understand why now, and that was just, looking at the stuff. But yeah, I would be very wary of anything that comes out like that, especially when you start looking at the chemical formula. I would really look into it before I used it. I don't use Scotchgard anywhere. I just clean my stuff all the time, that's all.
Cool, thank you. Do either of you have a response to this issue of just how many resources go into waging a fight against a company like DuPont, like in the film?
I can start. Yeah, it takes a tremendous amount of time and effort. I mean, I can speak personally from the investigation that we conducted at Physicians for Social Responsibility. I mean, it took us, as I mentioned, we filed this Freedom of Information Act request back when I worked at another organization in 2014. And it took years, literally years, for EPA to provide us thousands of pages of documents in response to this Freedom of Information Act request. And then it's taken years to sift through those thousands of pages, which are full of both scientific jargon and EPA insider jargon. You have to understand what you're looking at. And then, as I mentioned on this particular report, once we gleaned some information from the documents, which are covered with confidentiality claims that make it very difficult to know what's going on, we then had to find experts who could look at this data and tell us, is this PFAS? Is this likely to be PFAS? It's a very time-consuming process and expensive just to know what's going on. And now that we have the information, it also is going to be difficult to hold companies accountable, but not impossible. I have been involved in grassroots efforts to prevent drilling and fracking in various places that have been successful with a lot of organizing and commitment. I was involved in an effort in New York State that convinced the administration of Governor Cuomo to ban fracking in New York. I was involved in an effort to convince the Obama administration to put most of the George Washington National Forest off limits to drilling and fracking. There's been an effort like that in Maryland. Even in cases where there are not bans that are implemented, people have had some success. Colorado recently gave local governments the ability to regulate oil and gas drilling, which they did not have before, and that came as a result of pressure from grassroots groups. So you can make a difference, and in my experience, that difference starts with local involvement, educating your friends and neighbors, educating your local politicians, and working your way up the food chain.
I concur with Dusty. I don't know how many times Dusty and I've said this to him. Got to remember, folks, all politics is local politics. If you looked in the movie, the biggest bang came from when everybody in the town decided to go get their blood tested. That gave them what they needed to go after these people. And you've got to look at your politicians. I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care if you're a Democrat. I don't care if you're an independent. If that person is messing around with corporations that don't have your best interests in heart, and the easiest way to find that out is if you're looking at a politician, go to the election board and ask for his campaign finances. You'll see who owns him. And if it's these big corporations and you don't like what they're doing in your backyard, time to go find another politician. Time to find another elected official. Be vocal and stick with it, because it takes a long time. For the International Association of Firefighters, which represents every firefighter in the entire United States, it took them 10 years to get a lot of these cancers that we all knew we were getting from exposure to fire made into, yes, these are no questions. If Sil Caggiano got this cancer, it's a on-the-job issue. It took us years, and we had a lot of money that was behind it, and we had a lot of politicians that took money from us and worked on it. So you've got to educate your people. You've got to get people involved. You've got to find out who you're electing, who owns these people. And that's the only way you're going to stop this. Dusty and I and Ryan can fight all we want, but if you're not going to help yourself, if you're going to elect these people back into office, they're just going to keep coming back and nailing you.
So I'm going to bring Joanne on. Joanne, you have a question?
A question and some comments. So first of all, thank you. Thank you so much, Dusty, for all your research, and Serrato for the work you're doing. This is really important and awesome. I live in Cincinnati. I'm connected with a group called Green Umbrella, and we have started a subgroup, Faith Communities Go Green. But Bob Balat also lives in Cincinnati, as you figured that out from watching the film. He's also on the board of directors for Green Umbrella. And so I had a conversation with him, and I asked him what why did the film Dark Waters essentially disappear? It was only out in public for a very short time. And he concurred. He said it really was buried across the nation pretty quickly. It's been shown a lot more in Europe. He's been invited to various countries, European countries, to give talks related to the movie, but here very few people even know of it. And so he and a group of people made a subsequent film, which you may or may not be aware of, and it's titled The Devil We Know. And I really encourage all of you to watch that because it goes into the behind the scenes. He's in that movie. It's a documentary. It's not any actors. And he explains, for example, one thing that really struck me, and it relates to something that you said, was that the idea that chemicals, that they change their names just slightly. So PFAS, the Congress has said now that it's going to do a study on PFAS. Well, PFAS has changed the chemistry companies have, first of all, the DuPont in Parkersville is no longer DuPont, it's new DuPont. It's a different LLC. It was a spinoff. Second of all, DuPont merged with Monsanto. Third of all, the company in the new company was interviewed by Congress and they said, oh, we want you to study PFAS. We think that's very important. And that's because they're no longer using PFAS. They're using something called Gen X, which, as you pointed out, was very similar. And so that's just, to me, amazing. And as far as your comment about politicians, right now in Ohio, we are in the midst of redistricting and getting that those sort of things done. And so I think the most important thing is for everybody to find a redistricting citizens action group. OEC does that. League of Women's Voters is doing that so that people can do mapping for fair districts, because all the voting is screwed up because of the districting. So I really just wanted to share that information with you and hope that people can watch the movie The Devil We Know if you haven't seen it.
Thank you for that. I'm definitely going to check it out now.
Joanne's correct. The movie that was done that unseated the North American director of Statoil was not a United States produced documentary. It was a Norwegian documentary because Equinor, which is a Norwegian company, owned Statoil. Statoil was one of the largest well explosions in Ohio. Not only did they expose that, but the Norwegians also exposed probably one of the largest releases of methane in the United States out of a well that blew out in Belmont County. So it's not being done domestically. In Norway, when I was talking with the gentleman that put the documentary together, he was aghast of what we're allowing here in the United States. And I kept trying to tell him, look, Ole, they're allowed to do this. I know it's shocking to you, but the government allows them to do this. And he just, well, how is Ohio? I said, look, and I discussed with him. I said, Ohio has absolute power corrupts absolutely. And one party has retained control in Ohio for too long, as evidenced by the problems that we ran into with them trying to tax Ohio residents to keep nuclear power plants open that were failing. They actually managed to pass a tax by lying to the citizens. These people are all under investigation, but still, it wasn't until recently that the lead guy that was involved in all of this corruption was removed from office. They kept him in office. So, again, local politics, find out who your people are. Don't vote for people who are owned by these people. Trust me, in Europe, they're looking at us like we're crazy, but they're not going to do this kind of stuff here in the United States. And if they do, like she said happened with Dark Waters, they bury this stuff because it's bad for business.
One quick follow-up comment I would make is that one way to counteract the disappearance of a movie like Dark Waters is to do what Halt the Harm is doing right here today, which is to organize a local showing of the movie. And then you can combine that with a call to action in your community. You can bring in a speaker or two. I know Physicians for Social Responsibility would be happy to help Halt the Harm. Sil would, I'm sure, be happy to help with these efforts. And then more people can see the movie, and you can get the word out and help use it to organize folks for change. I know that's been difficult in the last year with COVID, but we can do things like this online and perhaps increasingly in person.
Yeah, and contact me if anybody has questions about licensing or wants to chat about the logistics of it. Bob, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you to the panelists, and appreciate all I've learned here watching the movie and in this discussion. I was a volunteer firefighter in Litchfield, Ohio, up until 1985, and I was relieved to leave the department at that time because HIV was still starting. Little did I know that all of this was still starting too, that you could have these toxic garments and toxic fires, and that was another hazard. But I appreciate what firefighters do. I am a member of SPAN Ohio, which is a group seeking Medicare for all. And I have since joined a group called Columbus Community Bill of Rights, which is trying to keep fracking waste out of the city in Columbus. And what I have seen most is the preemption by the legislature to, excuse me, I got construction going on in my basement and I might hear some interruption here. But the preemption thing is just drives me crazy that they have stopped local communities from trying to interfere with passing local restrictions on anything. But that's really trying to stop any public health initiatives or anything relating to this. Comments about that would be appreciated.
Sil, do you want to take that, or should I start? Yeah, preemption is a terrible rule in Ohio. Local communities everywhere should have the ability to determine what happens with their land. I mean, this is sort of a zoning reality that people take for granted across the country. But when it comes to oil and gas drilling, oftentimes, not just in Ohio, but in other states, the state government has taken away local control. I think maybe the first thing that comes to mind is you might want to link up with some of the people in Colorado who were recently able to win on that issue in Colorado and to overturn what was a ban on local control in that state. And maybe they have some insights on how that could also happen in Ohio. Maybe they would come and speak at some of your events.
It's not just a ban on, or not just a ban on any municipality keeping things in. It's municipalities, they decide to do the stuff in as well. They're playing a double-edged game here. You go to a township that's very poor, needs some money. That township is less likely to say anything if you throw in, well, we're gonna pave a couple of your roads, because they don't have the money. Your fire departments there are less likely to say something about what's going on there if you say, and we'll buy you a fire truck. So they pick and they choose a lot of their communities that they put this stuff in. You'll find the injection wells. Injection wells aren't going to be in an affluent area. You'll find your injection wells down in Appalachia, Ohio, in along, anywhere from Youngstown on that eastern border of Ohio River all the way down. You'll start finding these injection wells. They don't put them in Metro Ohio. You ain't going to see them in Columbus. Won't see them in Dayton. but you will see them in other places. And, you know, like Dusty said, they can put them wherever they want. There's no need for any kind of administration to approve it. They just pick the land and they said, here it's going to go. But they're very, very cautious as to where they go, because the poorer they are, the least likely these people are going to do what we're talking about and fighting them, because they don't have the money. Their legislatures don't have an attorney that can go after them. The resources to fight them are less. And this is where they tend to go. And I think it's kind of criminal. And it's something that the NAACP has also noticed. These stuff are going into their communities. It's living next to their communities. So they're starting to get smart and say, hey, look, we don't want this stuff here either. So the idea here is you've got to start getting all these grassroots groups, and hopefully Halt the Harm can do this, and co-join them into one set voice, you know, many voices into one, and fight these guys.
All right. And one of the comments that came through was just about, you know, there's a quote with Mark Ruffalo just about how, I'm actually trying to find it in the chat right now. Sorry about that. Just about how well, first I'm going to say this. In the movie, in order to make a feature film, it was very much about Rob's character. And so it might appear like he was the one who made everything happen kind of by himself. And that's just kind of the nature of how narratives unfold in a film. You have to really revolve around a central character. But there were so many other people involved in making that happen. And so, you know, I think that it's important to acknowledge that, to what you're saying, Sil, about, you know, local organizing and local politics, is it took a lot of people to make that happen. People getting their blood tested, people talking about the issue. And so I think one of the things that we really want to encourage is building out a network response to this and creating a space for people to stay in touch. And so after this presentation concludes, all of you that are interested in continuing a conversation about PFAS and fracking, that we've set up a forum for that. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat so everybody can check it out. And I'll send you an email with details as well. So I want to check in. Renard, you've got your hand raised as well. So go ahead, Renard. And I'm going to put the link to the discussion in the chat. So Renard, if you want to unmute yourself.
Second. Okay, there I am. Can you hear me now? Hello. Can anybody hear me?
You
Let
there?
me know.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Hi. Well, thank you everybody for doing this and allowing me to speak to everybody. You can hear me, correct? Okay. I want to thank. All right, thank you. I put a link on the chat. It's our private Vimeo link to see Groundswell Rising, Protecting Our Children's Air and Water, which is a film that we did about 6 years ago. Mark Ruffalo is in it, and the quote he gave us was he thought it was one of the best looks at the personal side of the fracking issue. I encourage everybody to go and see that film. I also want to remind everybody of a movement that is starting called Green Amendments for the Generations, which is started by Maya Van Rossum, who is in Groundswell Rising. She also founded Delaware Riverkeeper Network. And what that group is doing, they are working to get green amendments on the constitutions of every state and then the federal constitution, because if there's a green amendment which says it's our right to clean air, clean water, on the constitutions, new president comes in, they can't just roll back all the progress we've made, as we've seen happen so many times. So please check out Green Amendments for the Generations, see what they're doing. It's very important. We're also supporting that with a website we have called artistsforearth.com, ARTISTS, the number 4, earth.com. where world-class artists are allowing us to use their work to raise money for Food and Water Watch, Green Amendments for the Generations, Delaware Riverkeeper Network, and others. So please check those out. Great work. Thank you so much. And thank you to those who already, from the last meeting, downloaded Groundswell Rising. I appreciate them doing that. So please do. It's also on Amazon Prime, but you can get it free from the link. So thank you.
Thank you, Renard. And Elizabeth in the chat asked you to repost the link for the artist website as well.
I will.
Or just
okay. Artistforearth.com. I'll do that.
Great.
I'll put the whole thing up again.
All right. So it's 3:56. We're going to wrap up now. And I want to ask Sil or Dusty if you have any final things you want to say as we conclude our discussion today.
I'll jump in, echoing comments that the people made before. I want to say that all of these efforts to be successful have to be a team effort. And myself and Physicians for Social Responsibility are very excited to work with Halt the Harm and all of the member organizations in Halt the Harm to help you in your local fights to protect yourself against oil and gas pollution. If you have questions, I'm sorry, did someone have a question? I think it was just sounds coming in from someone's Zoom box. But we're happy to help you. Please let us know if you have questions. And as I said before, these fights are always difficult. In any state, but if people work together and build power and inform each other from the grassroots and work our way up, we can hold companies accountable and protect health and the environment.
I echo Dusty's sentiment on this. 14 years ago, I had no idea what was going into the ground when it was coming to fracking. And now I know more than I think I should, but it all starts somewhere. And, as the old saying goes, the journey of 1,000 steps starts with one. So this is a good start. There's a lot of people out there like this. I've traveled around the state of Ohio with Teresa Mills and a few of the other people doing some grassroots education, and everybody's concerned. The biggest thing that we have going for us is we know the truth. The industry is not willing to tell the truth. One of the things that I remember most about this latest injection brine stuff that we're going through is the guy that wants to sell the injection brine to the state of Ohio washed his feet in it. And I just kind of laughed and I said, that's great, because alpha particles don't go through skin. Ask him to take a drink of it. That's the truth. He won't. And when I had testified in front of various entities, I tell them point blank, the scientists that were here from the corporations telling you that this stuff is okay, they're being paid to come here and tell you it's okay. I'm sitting here free telling you it's not, and that I care about you getting it. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to care. We've got to care enough to make sure that we check our politicians. We got to care enough that we open our mouths and make our voices heard. And we've got to get together and, like Dusty said, work as in unison to try to change our environment. We've got to be what we want to have happen. Thanks again for inviting me. I enjoy doing this stuff. I hope I've helped out people.
Thank you so much, Sil and Dusty, for joining us. And thank you everybody who came and participated in the conversation and shared links in the chat. I'll be sending out the replay and some notes, so check your email for that. And as a way to wrap up, we're going to play a song. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll close out. And those of you who want to stay, we're going to start doing this. So if you have any videos you want to send me, I'm building a library of things I can play as a closing for for these network events. So thanks so much, everybody. And I'm going to put the link in the chat one more time to join the conversation in Halt the Harm Network. We created a special breakout group just for this topic. So folks are already sharing there. All right. Thank you. So this is by Mike Stout, who's a musician who came and gave a presentation at one of the A to Z Impacts of Plastic events. And so I'm going to go ahead and share this video with all of you.
Terry was a farmer in Southwest PA. With his good wife, Kathy, made their own way. They worked for everything they had, did what they wanted to do. The suspenders he wore were red, white, and blue. Truck driver from McKeesport, his nickname was Crow. Staying positive and decent, the only road maps he'd know. They'd take off on his Harley, just ride like the wind. North, south, east, and west, then back home again. He loved his farm and his family and life. He did no harm, he knew wrong from right. From his birth he did all that he could. With Mother Earth and creation he stood. A quiet life in the country was good for Terry Greenwood. In Daisy Town for 2 decades, living their dream. When the noise and the poison, Dominion Energy came. He refused to sign a lease, told them frackers no way. But the drillers were dictators who said you don't have a say. Wastewater spilled in his fields and his ponds. 11 cattle killed, stillborn or deformed. Dreams shattered and torn, drinking water turned to muck. And when he called the DEP, they said it's just farmers' luck. One of the first to speak out against the fracking morass, he said water's more important than gas. From Wyoming to Wisconsin to DC, he told his story with simple honesty. With the harm and the truth, there he stood, Mr. Terry Greenwood. Terry died on a warm summer day. A rare form of brain cancer took him away. They can't prove fracking killed him, which chemicals to blame. When greed and money trump health, the outcome's the same. He loved the earth and his family and life. For what it's worth, he knew wrong from right. Though his body is buried and gone, his spirit and cause will live on, doing all that we like Terry Greenwood, like Terry Greenwood, like Terry Greenwood, for Terry Greenwood.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And I'll share a link to that video in the replay email as well. So with that, I want to thank everybody for coming today and have a wonderful afternoon.
Ryan, can I ask a fast question?
Sure. Hey, Patricia.
Are we still supposed to throw out our Teflon pans? My family has so many of them. And I mentioned it the other day and they say, no, we've got PFAS in our bodies. We could keep our Teflon pans. Are we still to toss them because they're dangerous?
First of all, let me say quickly, I did have the privilege to meet Terry Greenwood, and that was really a beautiful song and video, and his memory, I think, makes all of our work more meaningful, and so I hope that we can continue on inspired by what he did. To answer your question, I do not use Teflon pans myself. I got rid of them, and I think the evidence is that once they get heated up to a certain point, they start outgassing PFAS. And one of the first signs that was a problem was when people's pet birds that were near the kitchen started dying because of exposure to the fumes from these pans. So I don't use them. I know people may have invested, in a number of different pieces of cookware, and there's obviously some expense involved in getting rid of them, but it seems like a good idea to do, if gradually, if not all at once. I don't know, Sil, if you want to say anything.
Okay, thank you.
Mine are gone. Good old-fashioned ironware, the old pots that the old stuff that Mom used to have. Put a little bit of oil in them, and they don't stick either. That's what we do in my house. Most of our Teflon stuff, except maybe for 1 or 2 cookie trays that I don't know what they're doing in there. We hardly ever use them, but everything else is gone. We got rid of them. Just don't want to take the chance.
Yep.
Can I make a suggestion?
We're listening.
Yeah. Instead of throwing them into the, because they got the Teflon, perhaps it's just best to put them in a bag and just keep them in your house. That way the Teflon doesn't get back into the system, and somebody else might use them. So at least you know where they are, and in a sense, you're keeping track of them. Might be safer that way. Just don't use them. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. There are groups that work on these issues. Ryan mentioned EWG. There's one here in Michigan that where I live called the Ecology Center. They may have some recommendations on exactly what to do with Teflon cookware.
Excellent.
It also sounds like, part of the big takeaway that I'm getting from the film and from these conversations is that, there's a lot of unregulated chemicals, or, they just change them. So BPA free plastic, what is that? So I just think that what Maren said, Sil said, using cast iron pans, Maren said, cast iron for the win. Just back to basics, glass, cast iron, wood. These are things that we don't need to ask big questions about. All right. Well, folks, it's been lovely. Please, I'll put the link one last time. It'd be great to have everybody in the network. It'd be fun to keep these conversations going. One of the things you can do is you can ask a question to the network and start a whole conversation thread within it. And once you get in there and set up your profile, I think you'll find it's really a simple platform to stay connected. So yes, I'll put a link to the song as well in the chat. Terry Greenwood. There you go. Cool. All right, I'm going to stop the recording and take off. Thank you so much again, Sil and Dusty and everybody for being here.
Thanks, Ryan, for doing this.